Okay.
Thank you everyone for coming today to our Brown Bag series hosted by the Office of International Studies and Education. We're really excited today that Dr. Carrie Symons has agreed to join us and share about her recent work with the Refugee Development Center, where she's had a relationship with them for 3 years. I had the privilege of seeing some of her work with the Globe Camp during summertime, and then more recently, reimagining migration. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is a collaboration with UCLA and Harvard, really prestigious program that Dr. Symons has had a fellowship with. So we're really excited to hear about everything you've been learning in relation to instructional practices for teachers working with immigrants and refugee students.
Great. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Rebecca.
Thank you.
So I also want to introduce a special guest. This is Mariah from the Refugee Development Center, who agreed to come today and chime in, and I'm going to hand over a few slides to her as a way to kind of represent, what we are about, because it's going to be very difficult for me to summarize in an hour what I've been up to for the last 3 years, and I know, Mariah, you can help out with that. And so we want to give you kind of the essence of things, and then also leave time for some discussion. And I'm bad about that. So I may just at some point stop and go to questions, even if I haven't gotten through all my slides. And also feel free to interject so that we can be in conversation. You can say a little bit about yourself.
Okay. So my name is Mariah, and I work at the Refugee Development Center. I started out as a volunteer and just kind of fell in love with the organization and the community and the passion. So I came to MSU and went through the MA TESOL program and found it to be really helpful. And they allowed me to kind of target my study towards community education, which was very cool. And then continued working at Lansings Community College, working in their ESL program and the MSU ELC. And then eventually, in 2013, started at the RTC full-time. I love it, and I get to teach every now and again still, but we're small, so we all do many things, and this collaboration with Carrie has been just phenomenal, and all of the other people who are a part of that, so thank you. I'm really grateful to be here and to be a part of that.
Thank you. If you could just take a moment, and I want to just do an exercise so that we won't take time to go around and have everybody introduce themselves, but if you could introduce yourself to someone next to you, and if you could please say your full name and have them say your full name back, and have them, pronounce it correctly, and feel free to correct them a little bit, and just tell them a brief history about your name. Just a brief history about where your name came from, maybe who named you, or if it's a family name, or Kassoon's eyes went wide.
Yes. I'm Rebecca Gordon. Rebecca is I have a sister, Leah. My parents originally crossed my granddaughter, and then for whatever reason they decided they liked Rebecca more. That's the tradition. So that's where my name comes from. Rose is my grandson's Gordon, I do not. I know Rebecca. There were like 7 years of Gordon is not sure. On my father's side, where that comes from, his father was adopted. I'm not exactly sure of the genealogy of So I have 4 seconds. it also
And that,
we have a hat giving name for our shelters and Mariah. We just started saying every name to see if maybe she responds to something. Others, Mariah was like Douglas, and he looked up, and we often joke and we call our cat Douglas now. And we always thought, this is so silly, who would name their cat Douglas? It's a name that we love. So that's my association with Douglas. I think in my generation, we had a few Dougs. I had a Doug growing up who was in the same class as me, but it wasn't a super common name.
And, all right, so when I was thinking about what I wanted to share today, and do today, is a combination of having this experience a little bit of the work that I've been doing, and not just me talking to you, because as I was designing my slides, it really felt like a lecture, and so with a theater background, I kind of mix things up, and you'll find that I'm a little spontaneous. And I want to start with the who, and so that's really where I've kind of come to in my work, and so starting with who's in the room is important. Before I introduce myself, I think it's important that you all had had a chance to introduce yourselves. Because for me, going from a doctoral student into a junior faculty who's about to go up for tenure, I really have had this kind of trajectory from what and how to who, meaning what instructional practices, how do we support emergent bilinguals, language and literacy development, and now I think also, big thanks and credit to all the experiences I've had, especially the RTC. It's really about who that person is that's doing the learning, and the person who is developing their literacy and language. So this is limited, but I feel like it's an important piece. Speaking of who, the who am I question to be doing this work. I'm US born, I'm white, I grew up middle class, I'm cisgender female. I moved around a lot as a kid within the United States, and I did live abroad for a year in England. I have a background in the performing arts. I'm a yoga teacher, I'm a former elementary classroom teacher of 10 years, and I'm an emergent bilingual. I'm learning Spanish as a second language. And I consider myself a community engaged scholar. And I recognize the fact that I'm working in an immigrant and refugee community, and with folks who don't necessarily identify in the same way. And so I'm constantly conscious of the way that I am potentially, well, not potentially, but probably bringing a white gaze to the work that I do, and trying to become introspective and conscious of how that shapes what I see and how I see it, and how I write about it, and the language I use to talk about it. And so these are conversations that we have, and being working with the RTC, we've really had a lot of conversations about the asset-based orientation that we adopt together as partners, and so that's an important piece of what I do. So starting out of the what, I started looking at instructional practices in a classroom-based setting, and literacy and language in particular. And reading comprehension is an area of expertise of mine, and I looked at it in narrative fiction texts and informational science texts. And this was pretty much my dissertation. The who that's missing here is the teacher, Miss Youssef, who taught in this classroom of fourth graders. With the language, I had and still have a sociolinguistic orientation to language development, which is specifically informed by systemic functional linguistics, which says that we develop language in communicative spaces for communicative purposes. The literacy really is informed by social constructivist and cognitive orientations, and that's coming from like a RAND model with the reader and the activity and the text within a sociocultural context, and the mental model of reading comprehension, where we're constructing meaning with the text using our background knowledge, etc. And then I started working with the Refugee Development Center and really realized that who I am fits well with this kind of label of community engaged scholarship. And Jessica, who is from Outreach and Engagement, is in the back of the room. So she and I have also been in conversation a lot, and I am grateful for her friendship and her being a thought partner in the work that I do, because it really is central to not only what I do, but the university as well. And so being a scholar and a researcher that does community engaged work is actually central to who Michigan State is as a university. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mariah to give you some of the background on the Refugee Development Center, who has been and continues to be my primary partner in this work.
Hello again. How many of you are familiar with the Refugee Development Center already? Okay, most of you. So we're just a small nonprofit. It started in Lansing primarily as to extend support that refugees were receiving from St. Vincent. St. Vincent is the resettlement agency in the area. In 2002, a conversation was had about how can we extend services past 90 days, and so the RTC was born. And then it has since been responding to the needs of the community from there on out in different ways. We also think of ourselves as being just one piece of a giant puzzle and connecting with our other community organizations and people and members and agencies and students to see where the needs are. So our staff has grown. It started out with just 2 people, and now we're at 16, which feels like a lot for us. And it is a lot for us, but we do most of our work because of the volunteers that we have and the interns, the really wonderful interns that some of you send our way, so thanks. Keep doing that. And that allows us to reach the community, and also it adds additional eyes on the ground to see, what's happening, and then we can figure out how we can assist with that. So the bridge up there is really important because we can't answer all the questions, and we know that. We don't have all the answers, and some of the things that we're doing we think are right now, but maybe in the future we'll have to, look at them again. But our primary focus is always how do we create paths within our organization that assist people in learning whatever their interests are in language. So how do they want to use language? Do they want to use it to talk with their new friend in their classroom, or do they want to use it to get a better job? And so what's the best way that we can support that? And then also making sure that we're listening and not assuming. So that's really who we are, and our partnership has really been wonderful.
And you are a community partner to so many.
Yeah, it helps us to continue to do the work, and especially in a time like now, when we know that, like St. Vincent Refugee Services, I just have to say this real quick, is really facing a difficult time because their funding is per person. And so when there is a halt of 90 days or there is a limit of 18,000, we have not received anybody in October. We stopped seeing people in September. That directly affects their funding. So not to sideline us, but I just have to make sure that you understand that when people don't come here, their funding decreases, but that doesn't mean the people that are in the community go anywhere. We need everyone. So we're one piece, and we'll pick up where we can with St. Vincent and try to help and assist. And that's some of the conversation that's happening right now. But having community partners that you trust and that do similar, mission work is really important. All of us. Sorry.
No, that's great. I'm going to go back one slide too. And so for me as a scholar, I really feel like if my work is not reaching the community and the youth and their families and the schools, this entire network, then I don't really know what the purpose of my work would be. So for me, it's kind of a no-brainer that it's, that we're generating, transmitting, applying, and preserving knowledge for the direct benefit of external audiences in ways that are consistent not only with what we're interested in, but it's not my research agenda, it's really a co-constructed research agenda with whom I'm working, so, yeah.
The definition for a refugee is really important because it affects who's allowed to come in this country under that kind of label. So we had somebody who was from UNHCR at a conference in Lansing a few weeks ago, and she was really talking about the importance of understanding this definition and then also understanding how it plays out in the world, because it does play out differently. So the UNHCR has defined refugees, saying that it's people who have been persecuted for these given reasons. The largest of which is the social class that allows people to come in if they're persecuted because of their sexual orientation and for other areas, but it still has to be proven. The difference in this really is the definition of what allows people to come here, but it's the same for asylees, it's just their location of where they're being processed. So we are the Refugee Development Center. 90% of our, probably a little bit more of that, are refugees, but we work with all English language learners and anyone who comes to our door. So we have a huge number of people who need help. So you see the 70.8 number, that's the largest number of forcibly displaced people that we have on record since we started counting. And it's not getting smaller, it's getting bigger. Forcibly displaced is different from the refugee definition because forcibly displaced includes all the people who have had to leave their home. They haven't necessarily met the definition or proven their case to anyone, but they've had to leave. That's why you see that 70.8 number is so much larger than maybe some facts you saw for refugee resettlement. We used to, on average, accept 95,000 people in this country. We've accepted up to 210,000. Now our number that we're looking at is 18,000. That's what, and at the rate that they're going, it's unlikely that we'll meet that. They've also taken that 18,000 and they've siphoned it off into bits and pieces. So I won't go on a tirade here. But we have a huge problem. Most of them are children. And the other part of that is that most of them are children. The other thing that we see is that, when you're talking with people, they've all had different experiences, of course, but the true fact is that they're less than 1%. It's like 0.005% are ever resettled. And so when you're thinking about the scope of the experiences and how many people have been left behind for our, the people that have made it that are in our community, it's just tremendous. And the need that's out there, it's just tremendous, so.
Yes. Yeah, I find that to be just so shocking, that there are over 2,500 refugees resettled in the Lansing area.
Yeah, yes, and it's about 700 a year generally, and we're at 0 right now. The fiscal year for refugee resettlement starts in October. So right now we have seen no one, and we didn't see anyone the very last part of the year.
But that's just such a small fraction of all the people who have actually been granted refugee status. Yes. And that's a small fraction of all the people who've been forcibly displaced in the world,
right.
For reasons of anything, persecution, environment, war, right? A little bit more about Lansing.
Okay, so Lansing is incredibly diverse because it's a free case city, so that means that anyone who meets the definition of a refugee can come to Lansing. They don't have to have family or background. That's what makes it so beautiful, is that we have people from around the world. So even though in the last few years we've seen mostly people coming from Congo and Somalia, because we've had so many people coming over for years, if you go into the schools, the number of languages is huge. And the people in the communities are so varied, which is wonderful. It's beautiful. And it makes the work that we do, if you come to like a summer globe camp, you can see it's just crystal clear. We've got a little bit of everyone from all around the world. But having a lot of the shared experiences of the interrupted education, which I know you have other slide, and I didn't mention it, but you know, we're needing really to look at each individual as an individual and understand what their experience, their educational experience was like. Because if they're coming from certain areas of the world, they have generally had more classroom experience, whereas others have not, or perhaps had some, but not very much.
And so often this is, leads to this kind of dialogue in the literature about the urgent concern being teachers not adequately prepared to provide English language instruction alongside content instruction. And they typically do not provide instruction that is culturally and linguistically responsive to immigrant-origin youth. So these are things that we know. This is just the very tip of the iceberg, though, because, again, it's focusing on language and content, which is important. It's a great entry point for folks. I don't want to say that it's not, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. It's not addressing things like recognizing the assets of their multilingualism, additive acculturation, where we can create environments where they can feel welcome and supported, and negotiating their new identities, as well as sustaining their cultural and linguistic background. So this is handy in the sense that this is the kind of language that funders are interested in, but it's just a tip of the iceberg, and so that being said, I think research practice partnerships with people who are experts in this area are really important, because it takes it out of that more limited view of just looking at language and literacy as phenomenon, and actually humanizes the work. So it takes what could be kind of an isolated scholarly look at this and makes it very real day to day and involved. So research practice partnership has 3 characteristics. It's mutualistic, it's long-term, and this often says the problem is like co-constructed or decided together. And we like to think of it as a shared commitment rather than a problem, right? Because it's the immigrant-origin youth who are at the center of what we're doing and what we're focused on. So a research practice partnership is something that we went into together, saying, yeah, let's see if we can do this. Let's I've been reading about this. I want to try this. And what it's meant is constant conversation, iteration, open communication, being willing to say, you know what, I don't think that's actually going to work. What else could we do? And so far we've conducted actually 5 different projects together. I'm going to go through several of these. So the first one was the asset inventory of GLOBE, and GLOBE stands for Gaining Learning Opportunities Through Better English. And it's been around since 2002,
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And it's grown from 11 students to
Yes.
one summer it was over 90,
Yeah.
right? These are all middle and high school youth in the greater Lansing area. They all have immigrant backgrounds, most of whom are refugees. And so when we decided what our first project was going to be, they invited us to take a look at what GLOBE was doing, the literacy and language opportunities that were being offered. And so through this process then, we decided one of the next steps would be to support their staff and their instructors in developing their knowledge about language. So that summer, you can see some of the breakdown, the languages and the countries and the youth. So one thing I think that makes the RTC really powerful is that their staff instructors know their students and families, so that's one of their assets. Another one of their assets is that there's this layered social support provided, which enables individualized attention, mentorship, and peer interaction for participating youth. And so this idea of a distributed mentorship model is something that they truly enact. It's, again, it's something that has been written about, but you can see it in action when you are a part of GLOBE. So the newcomers are right there at the center of what we're focusing on, and then tiered layers of support from there. Another asset that the RTC has is that newcomers are speaking home languages with peers and young leaders who serve as role models. So home languages is a lot of is welcomed, and it's part of what they're using as a resource in building relationships as well as English. They have a project-based learning focus where groups of linguistically diverse students use English as a common language to communicate, so that is aligned with the theory of using language for communicative purposes in social contexts. And so Christina and I have published on this here, so if you want to read more about that study, you can find it there. So then we presented these findings to the Refugee Development Center, and they said, you know, great, what can we do next? And then we asked if we could be a part of that. Yes, please. And so then we decided we would work on this development of a teaching toolkit. Peter DaCosta and I were co-PIs on this, and we worked with the Refugee Development Center staff who teaches English for speakers of other languages to adults and children. Many of them don't consider themselves teachers. And so then the question for us was, how do you support folks who don't consider themselves teachers in becoming like aware of how much of a teacher they really are, and doing that through providing them with some research-based practices on what can support very emergent English, emergent bilinguals. So we decided, we collaborated. It was Mariah, Erica, who's the director of the RTC, myself, Peter DaCosta, Yue Bian, and Christina Ponzio. Am I forgetting anybody? I think that was the main team.
Yeah.
And we came together and collaborated using research from linguistically responsive instruction and kind of some PSYOP stuff. And we designed 4 modules based on the research question, which linguistically responsive instructional practices are most leverageable for ESOL instructors who don't identify as teachers? So the 4 modules we designed and rolled them out. The first one is about cultivating an asset-based orientation and learning about students' language and academic backgrounds, providing comprehensible input, making content and language objectives explicit and checking for understanding, and scaffolding at the word, sentence, and whole text level. And so then the teachers were starting to play with these and take these up in their classrooms. And we went and observed those teachers, and we interviewed those teachers. And then Christina took the modules and put them online. And so now when they get volunteers, these volunteers can actually go through the modules and by themselves if they want. But I continue to be involved with training the interns during the summer, because I think they can probably do it on their own, but
It's good to have you there.
we'll see. And so then that led to a project where I realized, you know, going back to this, I realized when in conversation with these teachers that I had never taught in that context. And I really wasn't going to be able to understand that context until I taught in that context myself. And so for the 3rd project, we had during Globe, there are 2 weeks during Globe where they're here on campus. In the past, they had been working with the folks over at the Residential College of Arts and Humanities, designing kind of presentation, a digital presentation for their project that they were going to present, their business pitch at the end of Globe. And so the 2 weeks had to alternate because they couldn't accommodate all the kids in the camp. And so we said, how about we offer classes that they can then rotate through that are connected to what they're doing, literacy and language-wise. And so we set up a reading laboratory where we were investigating what linguistically responsive reading comprehension instruction looked like. And the purpose of this was really to explore the intersection of linguistically responsive instruction and opportunities for meaning making, and analyze instruction as a text through self-study and a critical community of practice and professional development. So this consisted of 8 days of instruction with 60 middle and high school youth from the RTC, and the youth were broken into groups of 15 that rotated through the literacy and language classes. And a typical class had 8 or more different languages in it, so out of 15 kids. And I only speak English. I'm learning Spanish as an additional language. So this is, I think, what where the real rub is right now in the field. Because more and more classrooms are not bilingual, they're multilingual. And we know that students learn their language, second language, or additional language best when they can leverage their first language, and their first language is a resource, their culture is a resource. So how can teachers work with multilingual students when teachers themselves are monolingual, and maybe monolingual English speaking, but not only? I know this is a phenomenon around the world. So let's say a teacher is really knowledgeable, and they know about the research. Most teachers, are trying to do best by their students. And they know that these, multilingual learners learn best if they can work in their home languages some, right? But then they say, but I don't know their language, and it stops. They feel like they don't know what to do. So this is where I think kind of the next step is for us, and what came out of that experience and that self-study is this idea of spacious teaching. And remember at the beginning it was from what and how to who, and now you can see the who is in the center. And it's in the context, they are students in the class who are in the context of a teacher-created dialogic meaning-making space where who the students are and what they bring are not only matter, but actually are at the center of what's being learned. And the teacher literally is on the periphery, making space for the students. So this is something that came about through our analysis, Christina's and I's analysis of our teaching. And I think it has pretty striking implications, because it means that a teacher has to recognize that there's going to be a lot they don't know. And the RTC has been very generous in helping me understand that that's actually an okay thing. Teachers aren't going to be able to know everything. They don't know, they're not able to know everything now anyway. But to recognize that that's actually part of teaching, and it's a good thing. It's actually a good thing because it makes more room for the other experts in the room, who are the students. And so in this case, I was teaching about main idea, and we had this text that was reflective of Lansing, young entrepreneurs who lived in Lansing, who looked like these youth, who had immigrant backgrounds, and we had this text from that community organization that I was trying to help them read so that they could see themselves reflected in the text and kind of get an idea of what business owners who are like them are like, what their characteristics are. And I realized that the text was written at a 10th grade level, and it was quite challenging, and I needed to back up, and I needed to actually work on some reading comprehension strategies. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll do main idea, right, because that's going to be fundamental. And so I went and I translated main idea into all the languages of the students who were going to be in my class that day. And I put it up on the whiteboard, and there were all kind of conversations going on. I said, okay, so now we're going to work on main idea. And this is main idea in all these languages. And the room got silent. And one of the students said, that's not right. And then another student said, yeah, it is. And then, no, it's not, no, it's not. And so this debate went on for a good probably 3 minutes. And I stepped aside. And there were conversations happening in English, there were conversations happening in Kinyarwanda. It was the Kinyarwanda translation that was contested. And so through the analysis of this instructional episode, I realized that it was actually important for me to step out and let them debate. And in I think my former teaching, I would have tried to not only minimize, but eliminate that conflict, right? Because it got heated. You don't speak Kinyarwanda, my dad does, but that doesn't mean you can, right? I'd show you the video, but I'm standing over there on the side, like I'm biting my lip, watching what's happening, and so it's a little embarrassing. But the room was literally in a U shape with the desks, and they were one of the students that was, kind of really taking on this idea of it not being right was moving back and forth in the center of the room to the side of the room. Caitlin, you were there.
I know, I'm just repicturing the whole thing.
Yes, yes. And so, I felt like a failure, after that class. I was like, oh my gosh, like that was totally out of hand. If anybody watched that, they would just think like, she has no classroom management. Those kids are, just completely walking all over her. What happened in the end was, not only did they come to realize that what the Kinyarwanda translation said was big idea, and once I heard that at the end of this episode, I was like, oh, big. Yeah, big, Maine. That's about right? So not only did they get to debate and negotiate meaning about this really important literacy concept in the languages of their choice, but they were also owning that moment, and I wasn't interfering. I didn't have to. I think as teachers we often assume we have to. Immigrant origin youth are equipped with tremendous resources for getting meaning across, debating meaning. So one of the central players in this episode, I saw him the other day, and I mentioned to him that I'd written this article, so you can find out more about this in detail from this piece. And I said, you're central in this piece that I published. He's like, really? I said, yeah. And I kind of told him everything that I just said to you. And he said, oh yeah, we used to debate all the time. That's just how we learn English, specifically. And I just thought, oh gosh, there's so much more here to learn, right? And so I'm really glad at the end of the day that I didn't know what to do. It wasn't, I had no idea it was going to strike that kind of conflict. And I'm glad I didn't shy away from it when it happened. So the other thing that happened after this was that I was invited to RTC Sicily for this course on migrants and refugees in the 21st century by Marcelo Suarez Orozco. And this was a group of 25 scholars who came together to talk about issues and interdisciplinary takes on this. So there were people from law, social work, economics, people who were working actually in refugee camps from Greece, from Germany, all over the world to talk about, what's happening, what are we doing? And the main question I walked away with was, what can we do in the United States? How can we change the negative perception of immigrants and immigration in the United States? And I went to Mariah and Erica and I said, how do you think the RTC does that? And this is a strange matter. And they said, we do that in Globe. We have interns come in and they talk about how life-changing that is for them, that they came in, with an appreciation for other cultures, but they come out like really having such a deep understanding of interculturality and what it means to be, someone who's trying to build relationships with people of other cultures, etc. And so then we decided we would do this fourth project where we, thanks to the Network for Global Civic Engagement, which is a network that's housed here out of MSU with Vincent Delgado and Steve Esquith over there in the Residential College of Arts and Humanities, who have also been fantastic partners and people who I would not have had the chance to work with if I hadn't been doing this work with the RTC. We said, what if we develop a project where we study how people change over the course of Globe, in particular how the interns and the young leaders who are immigrant origin youth. And so, and Laura Kennedy can speak to this, she was part of that project. So we developed a series of reflective dialogues that the folks who were interns and young leaders in Globe that summer, just this past summer, engaged in this kind of side program, a pilot program that would enable them to be reflective about their own experience in an intercultural context And we did pre and post interviews, and we did the reflective dialogues, and they had journals, and they created different kinds of artifacts in the times that we had together, all driven by the question, how can we change the negative perception of immigrants and immigration in the United States without asking that question directly necessarily until the end and saying, okay, so you know this is the question that I've been grappling with, what do you think? Like, based on everything we've talked about and learned together, what do you think? And the conclusion really was, more people need to do this. More people need to come together and share their stories. Because when we do that, we realize that we're not alone in our struggles. You know, someone who was a refugee said, I didn't know that rich people had problems too. There was a lot of learning, and it was not unidirectional, it was multi-directional. This is not a problem for only a certain group of people to interrogate. This is something that everybody can be a part of, because we're all going to have to be a part of the solution. So the refugees, immigrant origin background youth have tremendous agency in this work. They are just as much a part of the solution as we are, and vice versa. So the overall implications I really think so far is that this for me is really about, one, redefining the meaning of rigor in research. It really is about building long-lasting change and what that takes, and the relationships that have to happen. That is incredibly rigorous in a different way than I think we're used to thinking about rigor. The potential for 360-degree learning, so that we have everybody who's involved in the partnerships and the network learning from each other. It's again, not unidirectional. And that scholarship really is a form of activism. It's a way to communicate with people who maybe don't know as much about an issue, or are curious and want to learn more, and could potentially really change how people think about social issues this way. So I want to stop there so we have some time for a conversation. Thank you. Yes, Sam.
Well, I don't know if you could answer this better, or Mariah, but you know, you've spoken a lot about what you've learned from getting in with the community and having these dialogues. What do you think the university piece offers this process?
Well, I think so much, honestly. You know, we talk to people at MSU all the time, and we always receive a large number of, you know, volunteers and interns, and that is so beneficial to us. We get approached for projects, or we had prior to Carrie, you know, where people wanted to learn more about the community, but it was often kind of, we have this project and this is our objective, and we need access to the people in the community, and you have access, and so can we sit in and learn? And that's really burdensome for an organization as small as ours, and it makes our, it puts vulnerability in a negative way for our community. But the approach that, I mean, we really sat down and had a conversation, and it was, you know, we have this longer term goal. We're trying to figure out what it is, and we don't know really. We want to get involved in the community, and, you know, what do you think about that? And we already knew we had these tremendous teachers, but they don't value themselves enough for the work that they're doing, but it's great to talk to somebody else who has more experience in that capacity, who can validate those feelings, and then help us figure out a way to work with our, you know, instructors to bring that about. And that was the first step, you know, it was that observation, and then it was work with our teachers, and then we had just tremendous trust with the process, the method, the heart. I mean, you know, where it was coming from and how we were going to manage it. And Globe Camp it takes a ton of work. It is just a really big process. And so adding another element to that, sometimes we just say no, we just can't manage anything more. We already have to do this, that, and the other. But we just felt so supported. We really felt like, the process was going to be best supported by Carrie and her team. And so that's why we learned a lot. And the reports that come out of it and the experience from the kids that are a part of it and our coworkers, my coworkers, it is just beautiful. I was talking with another one of my coworkers the other day, and she said, oh, I saw this student, and told him that he was in the journal that Carrie had written, and he said, no way. And then he got really serious, and he said, Miss Carly, I have to read that journal. She's like, the whole journal? Yes, I have to read it. It's beautiful,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You hear so much about, university researchers mining the community for their own purposes, and I just wanted to really hear that other image.
Yeah, I think I can speak for myself. I being a part of that organization, we know that there's value in research, obviously,
Right.
but it does take on a lot. And so I think, you put in a lot of work and a lot of hours to make this happen. So it didn't just feel like it was mining. It really felt collaborative,
Thank you.
Yeah, I love a quote that Erica said in one of our toolkit meetings. It came up in just kind of a side conversation, as she said, the reason why it works with you is because you haven't come to us and asked us to change anything. Because I think as researchers we think, oh, I have a great idea. I'm going to design this intervention, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to test it, and that's fine. That's fine in certain contexts, but if the objective is long-term mutualistic, local and social change, that just doesn't make sense. It's not aligned.
Yeah, and the sustainability piece of it too, I think is a big part of what you just said. We need to know that when it's completed, that we're going to be able to continue on this process, and everything that happened is sustainable. We learned skills and ways to manage what we were already doing in a better way, and we can carry that on, so it's worth it.
I thought that your numbers talking about the drop in the number of, and I'm unclear whether you only deal with refugees or whether immigrants are also coming through.
Our name is Refugee Development Center. Our primary number are refugees, but we don't have a certain period of time that they have to be here. So they're newcomers once they arrive here, and they're on their pathway to citizenship. So some people are citizens of this country, and we're still working with them because we've known them for a long time. And in our classes, we really welcome anyone. Now, our largest grant requires that we work with a certain number of refugees that have been here for less than 5 years. And we haven't had any trouble reaching that number in the past. The challenge is that they based that off of 2 years ago. And so as we continue to watch those numbers, that becomes a challenge for us as well.
So does that mean there's a drop in immigration as well as in refugees?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that is what's happening because, even MSU has shared that they're concerned about international students don't want to come here in the numbers that they did because it doesn't feel comfortable. But for refugees, absolutely that has dropped off. Now, Samaritas, that works with unaccompanied minors, they're still seeing people come through, but at a much slower rate, but they're still coming. And then like Bethany Christian Services that works with kids on the border, those numbers are different, but they're coming in as asylees. These are refugees who are in another country who have been granted permission and that they have been stopped. So even though they've been cleared of all their background checks and had all of their things, they no longer can come.
Because Lansing's been really involved in resettling people who've come into the United States. And I know in the early 1980s, the Hmong from Vietnam were here, and so I had some contact with helping with resettling with that.
Yeah.
And then also the Sudanese,
Yes.
when they were having the Southern Sudan, mainly Christians, who were having a lot of problems, and a very large population of them came into Lansing.
Right.
And it made a really nice community for them where they shared food and their language, and it was just so, so much fun to be around that type of a group.
Yeah.
So I understand that there are political reasons for a lot of what's happening right now, but, and I'm really naive about all of that, but is there a way to like get a cat a bus and drive down to the border and just start bringing people up, or writing letters, or, you know, what is it that actually would work to get back to Lansing being a
Yeah,
place
they're
where
still working on that.
immigrants and refugees can settle?
Okay. Because I can't talk about advocacy, because I have my RTC hat on and we're federally funded.
Right.
But
I
private,
get it.
Carrie can.
All right.
So, and feel free to chime in for others who may already know about this, but yes, so I think one of the things that we can do is call, right? Calling the representatives is the most effective way to actually make our voices heard. And let's see. Right now, there's this GRACE Act, which would raise the number of refugees that are to 95,000, the average that it has been. So just saying that, you know, it needs to be there always. So if you can just call, most likely you'll reach a, what are they called, staffer, right? And just make your, you know, make your opinion known that you, and there's a website, if you go to this International Rescue Commission website, kind of give you some, is there language there still? Yeah. I don't see, they used to have it right in the foreground, but, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can say that these things are incredibly important. What they're looking at with that 18,000 is really just like gutting the whole resettlement process across the country. And so if there is enough of a lag and enough of money that's cut from resettlement agencies like St. Vincent, Refugee Services, then they're not going to be able to rebuild. So a lot of my friends that work over there have been laid off or have cut back their hours voluntarily to try to help with the budget until the numbers increase. But, you know, people need jobs, folks have responsibilities, and so they're going to look other places. And then who do we have in our community? These incredible, you know, these people who have been working on the ground for so long with the language and the wealth of knowledge and the heart for this work, and they're going to have to go do something else. And that creates a big problem when, assuming that in a year from now we're able to see those numbers increase, there's not going to be a structure in place to support it.
And just to add to that, I'm looking at this bill, the GRACE Act. Currently, there are no Michigan co-sponsors of that act in Congress, so
we could be asking
our representative to co-sponsor this bill.
Great, thank you. I knew you would have some very concrete ways to communicate.
And I think people already think about this, but if this is something any of us want to do, we also need through our networks to make sure other people and other organizations who we're working with and community groups are all pushing. The phone calls seem to be much more important than the emails. So even though email is fast, it doesn't have the same weight as the phone call.
This is an issue I pay attention to, but I have never heard about the GRACE Act. So what are good resources just to sort of keep, I mean, besides the International Rescue Commission website, but for American citizens to keep, what the heck we're doing?
UNHRC.
Yeah.
The UNHRC website is reliable, and it's current, it's updated frequently. What else?
Action of Greater Lansing is working on not just what's happening on the border, but what's happening with immigration at large, and they do a lot of advocacy. So I'm not sure, I think they might be a 501c4, and they're able to do that, and that's Action of Lansing.
There's a FAR.
Yeah, FAR, so we're a part of that as well, which is the All Faith Alliance for Refugees.
Refugees.
Yeah,
Okay.
Which has monthly newsletters and regular meetings and
yeah,
okay. Again, sort of coalition. Their coalitions is so vital thinking about this.
yeah, and the IRRC, so the Immigrant and Refugee Resource Collaborative, so if you're interested, if you know of any resources or you want to attend the meetings, usually quite a few people attend those, and but really it, spreading the word and making your calls.
Action for Lansing.
Action for Lansing. Action, great at Lansing, I think.
Action for Great.
Yeah.
Yes.
You mentioned the urgent concern in regard to the mainstream classroom teachers in the United States. And I was a former elementary teacher as well, and I wondered if, and maybe you mentioned it, so just to clarify, the development of a teaching toolkit that you use at the Refugee Development Center, if that is in K-12 public schools, or if that's like the trajectory, or if that, if there's, I don't know the details behind it, but.
Yeah, I think that, it's a bit of a synthesis of research that has been done already on Linguistic League, responsive instruction, and really thinking about what can teachers who don't consider themselves teachers or brand new teachers leverage, and it's not yet published. So it is one of these where I walk to campus thinking, oh, I've got to get that out there.
Yeah.
So, we need to do that.
Because I talk to people all the time and I'm like, oh, I just want to share it.
Yeah.
I want to share it, but yeah.
So we will.
We'll get there,
Yeah. Maybe we're winter break. I don't know,
Yeah.
coming back from winter break. Yeah. Derek. Doug.
Yeah, related to that, if you sort of take, I'm just going to pick a strategy like teaching main ideas since you suggested it, and it was developed in a certain language and a certain time in history and a certain culture by certain peoples, and then you think about the use of that, okay, in a different context, a different time, in different languages. Do you become aware of fundamental ways we just need to rethink main idea? Does it even have merit anymore? That might be an extreme position, but I'm just trying to see the different lenses you put in front of this. Does something like that stand up, like main idea anymore? And if so, how?
Great question. I think if we think about why, if communication is one of the main reasons why we use language, we know that if we hear someone talk at us for 5 minutes about what's important to them, we probably won't remember much of it, but if they can tell us in a sentence or even in a catchphrase, we probably will remember it. It's almost like a marketing mindset, and we have to get at, in a sense, the main idea or main point or main argument to do that, to synthesize that kind of communication. And I really feel like that's kind of where communication is headed. We operate in, you with your expertise in digital literacies, I think that there's this soundbite kind of mentality that's almost what we're accustomed to digesting anymore or seeking. And certainly that, I think, is a way to think about main idea. I mean, you could throw out an important detail, right, versus main idea. But then why would you throw out an important detail if, in fact, somebody's going to get one message from you? Wouldn't you want them to get the main point or the main message? And that's in the context of thinking about what we use language for, if it's for communication.
I know we're almost out of time. I have two different questions that are kind of sandwiched around this issue. So first I would make a suggestion. Actually, it feels like one of the great challenges in our college is people everybody knows something, but they know something different, and we don't have a way of sharing what we have. And so I am happy to volunteer my office as a chance for us to begin to think about sort of creating a resource bank where I'm thinking, and Alex may be in the same boat, we're teaching a group of freshmen where this week we've been talking about some of these issues, and I asked in class yesterday as they left to kind of exit ticket, like what's a couple questions, and one was, what do you want to know more? And a whole bunch of people said, in some sense, I want to know how somebody does, not how to teach, they're just trying to figure out who. And I feel like it burdens RTC. Somehow in our small community, RTC is supposed to educate all the future teachers of Michigan. And one, your demand is so huge and your staff, even though it's grown, is small, lots of volunteers are small. I worry about our somehow expecting you as an organization to educate, not just my section, but every section. And so I feel like if we could generate resources that amplify or complement what people can in direct engagement learn, that would be great. So if people want to begin to send ideas, including advocacy groups, we could, I don't, Doug and others can help me think about how to do this, but it feels like it would be lovely to create a resource site that is available for our college, that we can point our students to, that is different from how do we think about teaching students. This is just about, again, who. I'm curious, so that's a suggestion. It comes out of the question of if I'm channeling all these exit tickets for my students. And I feel like many of them are, in fact, right now at the RTC, but especially for the ones who aren't, how from your experience, you think people can, in addition to, or if they can't yet have sustained engagement, is there something short of that? Because I worry that we have a kind of feast or famine. People know nothing, or like, I am here on a weekly basis. And I think the reality of a place like this is that we have a lot of people in the middle. And the flip side of that is thinking about the kind of partnership and mutual work you've got. What are the institutional, I think we can sort of imagine all the institutional barriers, but what can foster this kind of work that can sort of remove some barriers? And what are things where, from both of your experiences, you see what can make more of this kind of work possible? So I'd love thoughts as we work about either of those.
Wow. I'm going to put in a shameless plug because you kind of laid the groundwork for it. We have a party coming up on Friday called Thanks Lansing. Thanks Lansing is a potluck. It's a community, so we have a lot of our students and our families. Sorry, it was perfect. It was like you just said it to me. And it's a great way to get to know the community at large and to share a meal. If you bring food, it's free. It's very kid-friendly and family-friendly. But you can take pictures. It's just a great time. There'll be 3 ladies doing henna from different parts of the world because they all do it. They do it differently. It's just going to be a really cool event. So we do that every year. That's our annual kind of potluck, get to know each other.
That's Thursday.
It's Friday.
Oh, Friday.
This year, yeah, it's Friday this year.
This week.
Yeah, yeah, in a couple days. And she left in the Lansing Public Media Center. And that's a great way. We, get new people who come in or who walk by and they're like, what is this? We say, come on in. And I think there's other activities, community activities that are going on, I think are a great way for one-time experience. Videos, we've been fortunate enough to be able to work on some videos through this project, and then additionally, we found that that's a great way for connecting with our community, and then additionally with the community at large. And we're willing to share, whatever you would need to create kind of a database with what we have and update numbers and whatnot.
I think too that there have been, I want to acknowledge all the doctoral students who have been involved as either research assistants or volunteers in the work, several of whom are in the room, and it's a process where you can get involved, and you can get involved kind of certainly through through us, through me. You know, it's not like you have to commit a ton of time, but you know, there are ways to get involved that don't require you to, you know, commit an entire summer or
Yeah.
once a week. Because there's always work to be done on the projects that I have. We have just a ton of data. And, you know, for example, the toolkit that we haven't published yet. So, you know, there's always room for volunteers on that end of things as well. And, you know, there are situations where, for example, sometimes there's a newcomer that is in a school out in maybe Williamston or Hull, and nobody in the school speaks that person's language. And so having somebody maybe as a, you know, liaison, not once a week, but, you know, who knows, that kind of thing, that kind of need arises, so.
Yeah, we're seeing that more and more because of the migration and, you know, services kind of dry up in one part of the country and then people hear, well, there's still something in Lansing, so they come to Lansing, but maybe they end up in DeWitt or Bath or.
What else?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. I think we're at time. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.